audiencias, confirmaciones. Brillante el desempeño del senador cubanoamericano Marco Rubio. Hizo un discurso extraordinario donde manifestó toda su convicción por el tema de la libertad, de la independencia. Habló de China como principal enemigo de los Estados Unidos, de las dictaduras de Cuba y de Venezuela, de las medidas tomadas arbitrariamente por la administración Biden separando a Cuba de la lista de países patrocinadores del terrorismo. De mucho habló Marco Rubio como parte de un alegato en el que habló de su historia, de su familia, de sus hijos, de su fe cristiana y de estar completamente convencido de lo importante que es servir a los Estados Unidos de América. Esto es parte de lo que dijo Marco Rubio. Evidencia.
In the 249-year history of our republic, there's only been 71 other Americans who have served in the role and the position that President Trump has now nominated me to occupy. And I want to thank him for his confidence, and it's an incredible honor. It is also, as many of you have already pointed out, an extraordinary responsibility. Three of my children, Amanda, Anthony, and Dominic, could not be here with us today or join us here in person. But I am happy that my wife Jeanette is here and that my daughter Daniela is here with me as well, because I think, as each of you know well, it really is impossible to do our job in the Senate, not to mention the job I've been nominated for, without the love and the support of our families. I'm also very pleased that my sisters, Barbara and Veronica, and my nephew Orlando, are joining me here today. And to me, it's a reminder that the path that brings me to this moment was paved by those who are not here with us today, by two parents who arrived here on May 27th of 1956 from Cuba, and they had nothing but the dreams of a better life. And because of them, I had the privilege to be born a citizen of the greatest nation in the history of mankind, and to be raised in a safe and stable home by parents who made their children's future the very purpose of their lives. I also want to acknowledge all the blessings that God has bestowed upon me in my life. My faith is critical and something I will lean and rely on heavily in the months that are ahead. In a tumultuous world where, in my faith, we are called to promote the cause of peace and the common good. And that task has gotten harder than it's ever been. And I will rely heavily on my faith and pray for God's blessings, that He'll provide me the strength, the wisdom, and the courage to do what is right in these tenuous moments. At the end of the Second World War, the United States was, in the words of then Secretary of State, tasked with creating an order, a world order, a free half, as he quote in his quote, out of chaos, without blowing to pieces, without blowing the whole of the world into pieces in the process. And in the decades that followed, that global order served us quite well. Americans' incomes rose and communities flourished. Alliances emerged in the Indo-Pacific and Europe that led to the emergence of stability and democracy and prosperity in these regions.
We've had forever war ever since. Little Marco, keep your hands.
Estos son manifestantes que irrumpen, en más de una ocasión interrumpen esta audiencia de Marco Rubio. Marco lució muy sereno con el tema, agradeció que fueran manifestantes en inglés y en español. Dice, es de agradecer tener manifestantes de modo bilingüe. Las acciones de Marco Rubio están matando niños en Nicaragua, Cuba y Venezuela, gritó una mujer en la audiencia. También se habló sobre el tema de otra mujer que gritaba, la educación es un derecho humano, como si Marco Rubio le hubiese retirado la educación a alguien. Son manifestantes improvisados, pero en su derecho de formar parte de este acontecimiento. La presencia de Marco Rubio fue inalterable, fantástica, convincente, gustó mucho, lució muy presidenciable para el ciclo 2028. Y esa semilla sí ya está plantada ahí, no es como las semillas que dijo Biden ayer en su discurso de despedida, que tiene plantadas en un cantero en el que al parecer no está llegando el agua. ¿Qué más dijo Marco Rubio? Evidencia.
All right, alliances emerged in the Indo-Pacific and in Europe that led to the emergence of stability, democracy, and prosperity, but it also prevented a cataclysmic world war. And ultimately, a wall in Berlin came down, and with it, an evil empire. Out of the triumphalism of the end of the long Cold War emerged a bipartisan consensus. And this consensus was that we had reached the end of history, that all of the nations of the world would now become members of the democratic Western-led community, that a foreign policy that served the national interest could now be replaced by one that served the liberal world order, and that all mankind was now destined to abandon national sovereignty and national identity and would instead become one human family and citizens of the world. This wasn't just a fantasy. We now know it was a dangerous delusion. Here in America and in many of the advanced economies across the world, an almost religious commitment to free and unfettered trade at the expense of our national economy shrunk the middle class, left the working class in crisis, collapsed our industrial capacity, and has pushed critical supply chains into the hands of adversaries and of rivals. An irrational zeal for maximum freedom of movement of people has resulted in a historic mass migration crisis here in America, but also around the world. It's one that threatens the stability of societies and of governments. Across the West, governments now censor and even prosecute domestic political opponents. Meanwhile, radical jihadists openly march in the streets and sadly drive vehicles into our people. While America far too often continued to prioritize the global order above our core national interests, other nations continue to act the way countries always have.
Las sanciones de Marco Rubio están
Pause.
matando a niños en Nicaragua, Cuba y Venezuela.
Back to order.
I get bilingual protests, which is, I think, is an entry cool.
As you know, that's a first here for us, at least in recent times.
All right.
Healthcare is a human right.
All right.
Education is a human right. Sanctions against
Back to order.
All right. So while America too often prioritized the global order above our core national interests, other nations continued to act the way nations have always acted and always will in what they perceive to be their best interest. And instead of folding into the post-Cold War global order, they have manipulated it to serve their interests at the expense of ours. We welcomed the Chinese Communist Party into the global order, and they took advantage of all of its benefits, and they ignored all of its obligations and responsibilities. Instead, they have repressed and lied and cheated and hacked and stolen their way into global superpower status, and they have done so at our expense and at the expense of the people of their own country. In our very own hemisphere, narco-terrorists and dictators and despots take advantage of open borders to drive mass migration, to traffic in women and children, and to flood our communities with deadly fentanyl and violent criminals. In Moscow, in Tehran, in Pyongyang, dictators, rogue states now sow chaos and instability and align with and they fund radical terror groups. And then they hide behind their veto power at the United Nations Security Council or the threats of nuclear war.
Mesurado, absolutamente presidenciable, sereno, Marco Rubio. Dijo Marco Rubio, además, una parte que me gustó mucho, dijo, la prudencia en la conducción de la política exterior no es un abandono de nuestros valores, es el entendimiento del sentido común. Si bien seguimos siendo la nación más rica y poderosa de la tierra, nuestra riqueza nunca ha sido ilimitada, nuestro poder nunca ha sido infinito. ¿Cómo puede Estados Unidos promover la paz en la tierra si no es primero seguro en su casa? ¿Para qué sirve Estados Unidos a nuestros aliados si no es fuerte? ¿Cómo puede Estados Unidos ayudar a poner fin al sufrimiento de los hijos de Dios en todo el mundo si no es próspero aquí en la casa? Les agradezco y espero el apoyo, ya sea porque crean que haría un buen trabajo o porque quieran deshacerse de mí. Eso dijo Marco Rubio brillantemente ayer ante el Comité del Senado. Aquí tenemos otro momento para disfrutar histórico de Marco Rubio ante el Comité del Senado de los Estados Unidos. Evidencia.
The post-war global order is not just obsolete, it is now a weapon being used against us. And all this has led to a moment in which we must now confront the single greatest risk of geopolitical instability and of generational global crisis in the lifetime of anyone alive and in this room today. 8 decades later, we are once again called to create a free world out of the chaos. And this will not be easy. And it will be impossible without a strong and a confident America that engages in the world, putting our core national interests once again above all else. Just 4 years ago, I believe we began to see the outlines and the beginnings of what that would look like. During President Trump's first term, American strength was a deterrent to our adversaries, and it gave us leverage in diplomacy. There were no new wars. ISIS was eviscerated, Soleimani was dead, the historic Abraham Accords were born, and Americans were safer as a result. Now, President Trump returns to office with an unmistakable mandate from the voters. They want a strong America engaged in the world, but guided by a clear objective to promote peace abroad and security and prosperity here at home. That is the promise that President Trump was elected to keep. And if I am confirmed, keeping that promise will be the core mission of the United States Department of State. Now, tragically, horrifying atrocities and unimaginable human suffering can be found on virtually every continent. And I am certain that today I will be asked about the array of programs and the activities the Department of State carries out to address them. We are a nation who was founded on the revolutionary truth that all men are created equal, and that our rights come not from man or from government, but from God. And so we will never be indifferent to the suffering of our fellow man. But ultimately, under President Trump,
Extraordinaria la intervención de Marco Rubio ante el Senado en esta audiencia de confirmación. 305-728-2021. Tu opinión en el aire. Ahora, por favor, ¿quién está en el aire? Le escucho. Hello.
Mi nombre es Alfaro Enrique Pérez, siempre en contra del comunismo. Te apoyamos toda la vida, te queremos de corazón. Gracias, Santiago.
Gracias a ti. ¿Quién más está en el aire? Le escucho. Hello.
Buenas tardes, habla Eicher Mampae. Los tiempos de Jesús todos son perfectos. Por eso hemos tenido que pagar todas las vicisitudes que se nos han presentado en estos 4 años. Tenía que decirse y se dijo.
Amén. Gracias. Gracias a ti. ¿Quién más está en el aire? Le oigo.
Hola, buenas tardes. Habla de Carolina del Norte, de Clara. Mi opinión es que este lunes pues ya empieza la liberación de este país y a empezar toda la limpieza que dejaron los woke, los corruptos de los demócratas. Solamente eso, gracias.
Gracias por la sintonía. Señoras, señores, solo la verdad nos hará libres. Señoras, señores, amanecerá y veremos.